Good one.
Okay, we're here in Mosgiel, New Zealand, and we're with Noel McCutcheon, and it's August 2012, and we're just doing this on behalf of Bob Minogue, who's the current owner of a Manx Norton that Noel originally had and raced in the Isle of Man.
And Europe.
And Europe. So righto then, Noel. So how did you come about purchasing the bike originally, and what was the procedure? Obviously you got it from the factory.
Yes, what happened was that, of course, they were worth a lot of money in those days, but we got it at factory price, like dealer price in other words.
Right.
And it was worked, who was it, Christchurch outfit called Velvin and Creswell in Christchurch, Manchester Street, Colombo Street, Christchurch. Yeah, so it was somewhere around about 300 and how much? 312 pounds, I think it was. Brand new at the factory. It was at dealer cost. At the same time, I bought a 7R AJS 350, and it was cheaper. It was 290 pounds. Yeah.
And so the Manx, you ordered it from New Zealand?
Yes. Yeah, through Velvin.
Okay. And then you went over to the UK, and did you pick it up from the factory, or was it?
Yes, picked it up from the factory. And at Birmingham, of course, and the factory was like a run-down junk shop. Terrible. Like, the outside was all, because they didn't worry about smoke in those days. And if you brushed along the wall of a building, you'd end up with black marks or soot down your forearm, your jacket you had on. Shocking place. Anyway, we went in there and it was like a rabbit warren. It had wee rooms off everywhere, and it was just, we couldn't get over what it was like. It's Norton factory, being so famous as it were in those days.
Mm.
Yeah. Whereas the 7R factory, AJS at Plumstead in London, was brand new because it got bombed out in the war.
Oh, okay.
So it was good.
So when you picked the bike up, did you have to do any modifications to it before? Did you race it in the UK before you went to the Isle of Man, or how did that work?
Modifications you never knew about.
Oh, it was just as factory, and that was it?
Yeah, it was it. And the only people that did it were some specialised tuners like Lansfield. There was a guy, Lansfield, and his ones he painted them green, I think it was, and they were went extra good, compared with the standard factory one. Knocked out 48 horsepower, big deal, 48 horsepower, and it was good for probably if you had the right gearing on, like in Europe, somewhere like where the hang in Belgium, Francorchamps in Belgium, on the straight, and there was a wee village through this big long straight, which if you had what we call balls in those days, you could keep the throttle wide open, otherwise you're sort of tweaking on, easing it off again, do like an S-bend through this thing, and it would do about 137 mile an hour if you had, you had about, in other words, like half a tooth up on the sprocket. Yeah, on the front sprocket, like another 2 teeth less on the back sprocket, in other words. Yeah.
So this was in 57.
Yeah.
And you went to the Isle of Man, and were you was there a New Zealand team that you raced in?
Yeah, we were selected here in New Zealand. There was always a team of 3.
Right.
And there was John Hempelman from Auckland, and John Anderson. From in those days, he lived in Wellington, but
okay.
Later on he moved to Rotorua, I call it.
Rotorua.
Yeah, Rotorua. The smell. Yeah.
And so in 57 then, at the TT, did you enter the junior and the senior, or?
Yes.
So you entered both. Which one was run first? Which one?
The junior was always first, and then they ran the senior.
So how did you go in the junior? What was the?
I got ninth. I was the first private bike till 350 AJ to win. The factory bike was used by a Kiwi guy up in Auckland. Lost his name. He's dead now, but he had the factory bike, and he finished sixth, and I finished ninth on the standard one. And I was
on the
first
standard
7R. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the Manx thing, Poms being Poms, decided to make the senior race 8 laps instead of 7, which was the maximum. Normally in those days it was 7 laps, which was quite a long way, 37 3/4 miles around for one lap.
That's right.
So it's quite a long way, and you'd be going for 3 hours, riding for 3 hours in those days. So so I got ninth, and after that, on the senior race, I was up to 10th in the senior race, and finally the bike expired, because like all the Manx Nortons fell apart for that distance, and I was up to 10th after about 5 laps, I think it was, and then finally the clutch packed up, and I couldn't even get up the mountain. Just kept slipping all the time. Couldn't even climb the mountain. And luckily, or unluckily, at the time, the oil tank had also split, and there was oil all over the back wheel. So as I was climbing the mountain with the clutch slipping, and when I pulled up and looked, and here's the old Acron rims at the back were full of oil, or the rim was full of oil, from the split oil tank. Because the Manx Nortons had 2 through bolts that went through the oil tank, and they had sort of rubber buffers on them to stop the vibration, but it wasn't enough. So we threw those away, and we just had, in those days you didn't have any stretchies, so we cut in a tube up and had a rubber pad underneath the thing, and the oil tank, and put a stretchy, like a piece of inner tube round the thing to hold it on, and that cured that problem after getting it welded, of course. Yeah.
And so that was the end of your 57 event then?
That was in the Isle of Man.
In the Isle of Man.
Yeah.
And
then we went to Europe.
You raced in Europe in 57 with it?
Yeah, all over the place in Europe, yeah.
So where in Europe did you race it that year? Can you recall? Or
first of all, we went to the Dutch TT, which
Assen?
was the second thing. Yeah, Assen. Raced it there, and then where the hell else did we go? From Assen we went to Belgium, and went to Spa-Francorchamps deal. We were there, and then we went to Czechoslovakia in those days. Now it's the Czech Republic or whatever. So it was Czechoslovakia, and you had to go through no man's land because it's a communist country, and you had, they called it the race of peace. Joke. And you had no man's land. When you went from Vienna, went across to the border, there was no man's land for like sort of a couple of miles, and then you came to the big barbed wire fences and guard posts up on top of the permanent fences and all that drone. You think, geez, where are we coming to, And they had, when you went through all the countryside, they had speakers up. No one was allowed radios in Checo in those times, so they had their own speakers up so they could broadcast their own propaganda to the people, as you went through all the villages.
And so did you race in Europe for that whole year, and then you didn't come back to New Zealand? You just stayed over there?
No, came back in about September.
Okay. And you brought the bikes back with you, or not?
Brought it back, and that's how I sold it on to Colin Marsden.
But that was in 58, was it?
57.
That was in 57?
Yeah.
So you didn't race the Manx there in 58?
No, sold it to him.
Oh, you sold it to Marsden.
And then I got another brand new one from the factory. 58.
In 58, you got another new one from the factory.
Yeah,
So the one that Bob Minogue's got then is your 57 bike.
exactly. Yeah.
And is that the one that you crashed at some stage?
In France. Yeah. The circuit was about 10 mile around, I suppose, 8 to 10 miles around in the lower part of France. It had cobblestones and God knows what else there, and it was up and down and hilly and whatever. And I was having a big battle with guys, the Aussies at the time, a couple of Hinton brothers. Eric was the main one, Eric, and I can't think of the other guy's name now, but Eric had a Manx Norton, and his father originally rode for the factory way back beforehand, so he had some real good parts on the bike, which was quite quick, but better than our one. But anyway, the Villefranche de Rouergue, they call it, which is down the south of France. And they had 2 races, and it was the best time of the 2 races, which was real tricky. But anyway, he came down this first race and came down this hill and round a right-hand bend. And at the bottom of the hill, he had an artificial chicane made up of straw bales, because the year before some Canadian guy had smacked into a big stone wall at the end of it where there was a river over the other side, and he got killed. So they decided to slow it down by putting a chicane there. And anyway, as we came down and went round, I was lying second behind Eric, and I drove on just a wee bit too early, drove on, and it drifted me out, and I caught one of these straw bales with my left footrest, and my foot, of course, and that threw me offline to get round the left-hander of the S-bend, and I was shot across the road, still on the bike, smacked into the straw bale on the right-hand side, and the Norton uncharacteristically shook its head, as they call it, tank slapper, and biffed me off, and I can still picture looking at the motor as I went down head first, looking at it upside down as I smacked into the road. And once the bike threw me off, it carried on without me. And it rode across the road, and I'm sitting in the middle of the road, and luckily the other guys all missed me because it was the first lap, and they all luckily missed me, and I was sitting in the middle of the road saying, "Stop, you bastard, stop," because over in France and that, houses, they build them right out and there's no footpath. So there's a stone wall of a cottage sticking out, and it's heading straight for it, and I can imagine like a movie where they're going kaboom, and it brushed the wall, luckily, before it hit the stone wall, and that slowed it down, hitting the wall, and before it hit the actual cottage. And the only thing that it did, it bent the frame but didn't bend the forks, because the way the old Manx Norton was, the top frame tubes went along to the bottom of the steering head, and then the cradle frame and the up down tubes coming from the head just crossed over like that, and it was quite weak there, surprisingly, and it bent the frame but didn't bend the forks. Crazy. So I had to take it back to the factory, of course, and get it. And of course, they don't muck around, they don't straighten frames, and another new frame went into it straight away, and it ended up that it same as a 350 size frame, was the same as a 500 frame. So it ended up that always upset the guy Minogue because of the fact that it had a 350 frame number on it.
Okay. But that was replaced at the factory.
Yeah.
And was that, do you think, because they only had 350 frames available? Was it sort of short notice, or how did that work?
I guess they must have. Yeah. And what cheesed me off was they charged me £1 or £2 at the time, which was a bit of money at those days, for a front axle nut, sleeve nut that went through the forks for the front axle, because it had a bit of chrome taken off it.